Hello. So, towards the end of the chapter, chapter 1, obviously, they mentioned some sort of philosophical debates that have gone throughout philosophy and early psychology, and to a certain extent, even today, in psychology and some other fields. Um, so I'll mention some of those. They set these up as kind of battling it out against each other. They don't always do that. But I mentioned nativism versus empiricism. So nativism versus empiricism. That fly is empirically bothering me. But I must have inherited the ability to perceive it. Ah, ha, ha, ha. So there's nativism and empiricism. Nativism, that approach tends to emphasize inheritance. Right? It's native, it's inborn, it's inherited, it's innate from birth, right? So nativism tends to emphasize that approach. It was inherited or it's inborn, versus empiricism, which more so tries to emphasize it's coming from experience, right? It's through experience that we come to know things. So either it's inborn nativism, or we learn it through our experiences in the world, empiricism. At least that's one way you can sort of confront those different approaches with each other. So they mentioned that. They also mentioned mechanism versus vitalism. So mechanism versus vitalism. Mechanism tends to, mechanical is what mechanism, right? So we're talking mechanical. So mechanism views nature in a mechanical way. So in some ways we think of, this started with Newton, perceiving the universe as one giant clock that obeys these natural laws. Well, that views nature as a mechanism, right? Now, there are many philosophers who thought that human beings are just mechanisms, that life is just mechanical. It can be explained completely through material processes and through determinism. So that would be kind of the mechanical approach or mechanism approach to life. Vitalism versus vitalism. Vitalism, not so much necessarily a big deal today. I mean, doctors, and biology. I mean, today we know you can completely explain life in terms of materials, right? You can completely explain a life form without referring to any external force. We know that now. But vitalism, back especially 1800s, when you had this debate among physiologists, can we understand life or not? And vitalism was on the side of the debate that says no. We are not ever going to be able to completely explain life without referring to this vital immaterial part, right? So vitalism basically argues there's something special about life. There's a life force of some sort that's really important. And so we're never really going to be able to explain, especially human beings, in a mechanical way. Right? So that's the mechanism versus vitalism, really. And I mentioned rationalism versus irrationalism. Well, rationalism, as a philosophy, of course, emphasizes thought processes, right? So rationalism also implies, logical, rational decision-making as being important. So that we, as human beings, we can think logically, we can rationally think and make choices. However, right, there were some that think, no, right? So it's rationalism versus irrationalism. Irrationalism might think that human beings actually make a lot of irrational choices. That there are things outside of our conscious mind that influence our behavior. They mentioned ever so briefly there that, in terms of early psychologists, that would be on the irrational side of the debate, or irrationalism here, would be, the psychodynamic folks like Freud and Jung, J-U-N-G, Jung, right? But Freud, the psychoanalyst, I believe that you've got this unconscious mind that's influencing our behavior and the choices we make. So it's irrational. Part of us is irrational. Another type of irrationality, though, would be like with the romantic and existential philosophers who believed that emotions are really important in what we do too. And emotions, of course, are irrational, right? They're emotions. So you have kind of that debate there, rationalism versus irrationalism. So they mentioned that in this as well. Let's see, what else do they mention here? I want to be sure to cover it all. Mention some other stuff. Well, okay, yeah, they mention, objective versus subjective reality. Once again, that can be really important. A lot of philosophers, a lot of early scientists wondered if our senses, our human senses, really give us an accurate interpretation of the physical world. So can we really know what's out there? So objective reality versus subjective reality. And of course, a lot of philosophers, and even people today might say we don't really have an accurate understanding of stuff outside ourselves. So there's objective reality out there, but can I really know that? Some would answer no, because the only thing we really know is our subjective experience. So that's objective versus subjective reality. Of course, nowadays, I don't think very many people think that, that our senses are very inaccurate. We know there are limitations to them. We can only perceive certain things, right? But, they do mention this naive realism at this point there too, talking about, that's on the objective side of the debate, because naive realism, or the naive realist, just believes that, of course, our senses provide us with accurate information about the world. I mean, I'm walking around, I don't accidentally kill myself. When I perceive things, I can, they couldn't do this then, but today I'm driving my car, I don't run into things. My senses, by my very experience of being able to live and interact and survive, just that alone just demonstrates my senses are giving me accurate information about the world. So that's a little bit on the objective versus subjective reality thing. Oh, they also mentioned a term that's very important here and can be part of a debate in psychology today, and that is this reification, right? It's called reification. And yeah, this deals with the object or the idea. Just because we have come up with a word for something, don't reify it. Right? Just because we've named it or given it a name does not mean that idea or that thing objectively exists in the world. All right? And there you can still get into some debates in intelligence and personality areas of psychology. Just because we've named something intelligence, does that mean intelligence really exists independent of that term intelligence that we use? Same thing with personality. Just because we've named something personality and we use it to try to explain human behavior, that doesn't mean that personality objectively exists out there. So don't reify something. Just because we have a name for it, that doesn't mean it really exists. Right? Just because we say they're ghosts doesn't mean ghosts really exist. So some severe critics would say just because we label something intelligence doesn't mean intelligence objectively exists. Right? So they mentioned that, and they have the problem of the self at the end of the chapter. I mentioned that a tiny bit. Kind of more of a philosophical thing, but also, I guess, related to psychology. Obviously, we do self-esteem, a lot of concept of the self, self-identity, some of that stuff. But also, how is it I used to be, 3 feet tall or shorter than that, and now look at me. You can't tell how tall I am, but anyway, I'm more than 3 feet tall, and I am so different from what I was like when I was a kid. And yet I'm still me. I still have a sense that I'm the same person, even though I've changed dramatically. How is it I have this consistent sense of self? That's the problem of the self. Of course, John Locke, one of the philosophers, said, and I think as good as explanation as any, that well, it's because we have memories. I have the memories for when I was that way and all the way up to when I am now. So since I have those memories, that enables me to maintain a sense of me being the same person. Makes good sense. Of course, then we get into psychological research nowadays that shows that human memory is wrong all the time. We got so many false memories in there and stuff, and inaccurate memories. Well, if I'm basing my sense of self based on inaccurate memories, is my sense of self anything like who I am? Well, that would be a debate. But anyway, I better finish this because it's getting pretty long. Bye-bye.